The following accounts have been submitted by military personnel. These stories are claimed to describe true events. I ask you to listen in good faith and decide for yourself what to believe. My name is Tommy, United States Navy, active duty. This is a recounting of my buddy's experience during his United States Military Corps 2013 operations in Iraq. I remember the look on his and his corporal's faces when they returned back to base. After a few hours and a few rounds down the range, he told me what had happened. His corporal ended up verifying his story with his own experiences back in the chow hall. These are his words. Somehow we got turned around in the Iraqi desert. Our patrol took us a few too many clicks south from base camp than I was comfortable with. Before we knew it, the 6 of us were wandering in a desert with no name and no point of reference. Thanks to cloud cover, even the stars didn't shine that night. Our lead was Corporal Matz, and the 5 of us were giving him hell for getting us lost, and he was starting to get angry. He wasn't snapping back or nothing, but that's how he always was when his temper was bubbling. It was kind of scary at times. After about an hour of walking and talking, we caught a lucky break. The clouds were breaking up and the distant scenery came into view. Desert. Nothing but desert sand and a pathetic-looking hut about 50 yards east from our position. Lieutenant Corporals Dominic and Hernandez scouted ahead to secure the structure, while Corporal Matz and Private Marcus Brown and I covered them from the closest dune. A few minutes after entering, we got the all clear. Coming into the building, we could see there wasn't much left of it. There was one solid wall facing southeast, the rest of them were only half of a wall each, and a single corner of the northernmost wall. The remaining walls were pockmarked and there were dark brown stains on the rubble and walls. The roof was mostly intact, except for the 6-foot wide hole. Matz and Marcus were looking them over, while Dominic was scoping out the distance, making sure we weren't in someone's backyard or something like that. "It's blood, old, but it's blood," Matz said, as he clicked off his light and wiped his hands on his sleeve. Marcus was poking his fingers into the holes in the walls. "Shrapnel," he announced. "Probably mortar fire." We didn't know how whoever had been there before got killed. Hunkering down was not an appealing prospect, but Matz made the call. We were to take turns standing fire watch. Matz first, then Hernandez, Dent, Marcus, Dom, then Brown. Once it was bright enough to see, we would head out. Once the law was passed, we started settling down. It felt like only a few minutes before I woke up to a bright light in my face, and Hernandez nudging my shoulder. In a few minutes I was leaning against a wall, staring out at an empty desert. The night air was so dark, I could just barely make out the difference between sand and sky. The clouds reformed, blocking any moonlight from passing through. I would have been creeped out back home, but this was common here. The only sounds to be heard were from the rest of us asleep a few feet away, huddled together to keep warm. Thinking back on it now, all those sounds were kind of dull too, like the sound didn't have any echo, no meat behind it. It was about an hour into my watch when I almost jumped out of my skin. The sound of footsteps. They were coming from around the southern corner, but still far enough off not to be an immediate threat. Readying my rifle, I took cover behind the corner and peeked over. Nothing. Maybe it was just wind and sand. Maybe I was too tired. Just as I was starting to calm down, there was a pat on my left shoulder. I would have shouted, but once I saw him, I was more relieved than anything else. It was just another Marine. Just one in battle rattle. His face was about a foot from mine as he put his fingers to his lips and shushed me. "Stay quiet, Boot," he said. "Get everyone up and get your stuff. We have rescue on the way." Rescue? For a moment I forgot we were lost on patrol. The Marine got up and walked around the southeastern wall, seemingly to make a call on his radio. I started waking everyone up, telling them all what just happened. Mats walked completely around the southeastern wall and back again. He looked annoyed. There was no one there, he said in so many words. Mats got close to me, really close. I told him to calm down. He just walked behind the wall, I said, pointing to the southeastern wall. Mats glanced back and forth between me and that hole-riddled southeastern wall. He changed from annoyed to confused. His tone changed and he directed Brown with his finger to follow him. Everyone got their rifles and kneeled in a circle as Mats and Brown flanked the wall. They walked around it and found nothing but each other and their footprints. They came back, swearing under their breaths at me. Marcus nudged my shoulder once we all stood down. "You sure you saw that?" Marcus eyed me up, I guess checking my face for fatigue. He must have thought I looked tired. "As sure as you see me." After that, it was determined that my watch was done. I was too tired. I nodded and agreed as Marcus took over. As I settled down for the night, I wondered if what I had experienced was real. The others moaned as we all huddled up. I was out in seconds, comfortable with Marcus watching over us. Soon enough, I was woken up by everyone scrambling to their feet and grabbing their gear. Marcus shuffled up to me as I sat up. "Dent, that Marine you saw, what did he look like? Was he in a vest? Did you get his name? See his face?" Marcus machine-gunned questions at me. He was shaken up. "Yeah, he had a 5 o'clock shadow, white guy, older looking, like mid-30s. "Name, did you get his name?" "No," I answered as I stuffed my sleeper into my ruck. Marcus told me that he had seen him too. His head was swiveling around, nervous. I was freaked out now. Mats was doing a head count when Dominic said loud enough for all of us to hear, let's go, we're moving out." As we started walking, I saw Dominic reach down and pick up something in the sand near the southeastern wall. I knew that clink. He shone his light on his find. Dog tags. I could tell that from the glint too. We doubled time to the dunes and tried to see where we needed to go. The sky was a little brighter now with pending daybreak. Mats managed to get a radio signal and called in our statuses. About a half hour later, we saw our first helo overhead. Then an hour after that, the Humvees reached us. Once back at base, we were debriefed and had to make reports on how we got lost and anything we may have experienced. Mine must have been a couple of pages, front and back, but I doubt it all made it up to the Combat Operations Center. Marcus and Dominic came up to me in a smoke pit later that day. What they shared with me made the hair on my arms and neck stand on end. Marcus told me about the sound of footsteps, the pat on his shoulder, then the Marine so close he could smell the day-old stink on his breath. He told me he was told the same exact thing I was told, and saw the exact thing I saw down to the southeastern wall. If that wasn't crazy enough, there was more. Dominic nudged Marcus's side, lightly urging him to share the rest. Marcus swallowed hard before he spoke again. I asked around, he told me. There was a 4-man patrol about 3 weeks ago that was recovered in that very house. He said it so quietly I had to repeat one word. Recovered? As in their remains, Dominic answered with his hands in his pockets, a Marine Corps no-no. I cracked a smirk. They were messing with me, right? I had to ask, but they didn't budge. I could almost hear the deafening boom sound that comes right after earth-shaking revelations in movies and TV shows. They both shook their heads. After almost a minute of awkward silence, Marcus pulled a piece of paper out of his left leg pouch. It was folded in 4, but still fresh. He handed it to me and asked if this was the Marine I saw. It was. I asked Marcus if he had seen him too. I immediately realized that asking him was pointless because I already knew the answer. He answered with a single nod. Dominic then pulled his right hand out of his pocket and turned his palm up, showing the dog tags he had found. His name was Jeremy P. Roberts, Sergeant. He and his men had been taken out in that house, blown apart by mortar fire. The enemy was never neutralized, so they could still be out there. Marcus and Dominic were done. I was sick to my stomach. The guys walked away again after an awkward silence. I had chills in 110-degree heat. The next day we got word that hours after we all bugged out of there, the house was hit with mortars again. This time it was leveled. When I heard the news, I got weak. I have served twice in Afghanistan, once with Operation Slipper and once on Operation High Road. I was attached to a light armoured vehicle or LAV unit that was serving in the sandpit, military slang for Afghanistan, and I was just doing my job. I was not special forces or anything special at all. I was just a truckie doing transport jobs, bringing food and water and ammo, and moving people around when needed. I was a corporal at the time, doing a sergeant's job, and really enjoying doing what I had trained for. Then, one cold Monday, I was told that we had to do a run, 2 LAVs and 3 Bushmasters, trucks, and as usual I was keen to go, just to get off the base, but also so I could say I went outside the wire, as some soldiers never do. We left at 05:30 hours. This annoyed me a little, as the sun would be in our eyes as it came up, and would make identifying possible IEDs, improvised explosive devices, a little harder. The only consolation was that we would be on a route that was well known to all, and as such was deemed safe. Well, safe-ish. We were 3/4 of the way through the convoy when the lead LAV stopped and pulled off the road. The concrete on the right side of the drain looked as though it had been replaced. This was very suspicious. So we backed up about 300 meters. I got out and we all stood there for a moment, trying to decide what was the best course of action. It was then that the IED in the concrete detonated. It was a huge explosion. It sent pieces of debris in every direction. A rock the size of a 5-cent piece blew through my front left side, just below my chest rig, and exited out my lower back, taking some of my spine with it. Fortunately, not the spinal cord, just some of the bone. It was a strange sensation. Painful, yes, but I was not panicked. I knew I had been hit with something in the front, but I could not feel any pain in my back at all, so I did not think it was that bad at the time. After a second or two, I could not stand due to the pain in my lower front. Needless to say, my blokes went into overdrive once I fell down and they saw the blood. The medic showed up and did his bit, then the chopper picked me up and I was taken to hospital. This is where things started to get weird. Once the medical staff started taking my clothes off, the pain really kicked in, and I was told later they gave me a drug called ketamine. This killed the pain, but straight away I could see a bloke who looked like a heavy-set African-American soldier. He was wearing early kit, the old H harness and desert cam, but no helmet or weapon. Every room I was put in for days afterwards, this bloke was there. Sometimes standing in the corner, or sometimes standing beside me, just looking at me. I asked the nurse once who he was, but she just looked at me as though I were a weirdo. She quickly checked my IV and left. After the 3rd day of this, I found my courage and asked him his name, and this scared the hell out of me. He actually answered. He said his name was Brian Harris or Davis. I'm not quite sure which. For some reason I could not understand the last name properly. He was with me for about a week, and then I never saw him again. A strange story, don't you think? But here's the real kicker. I was an Australian soldier, and I have never served with or met an African-American soldier. Well, until that point. I simply have no idea who that man was, where he came from, or where he went. I was a 5-level aircraft mechanic on KC-135 refueling jets. My enlistment began as planes returned from the First Gulf War and stateside duties. It was a mess and we knew it, but we did not stop our job for dirt or odours, or for the plane loads of medical conditions that may have flown with it. We thought nothing of the hazards. What I can only describe as weirdness began in 1991. I was a young airman, eager to volunteer and follow all orders. I emptied the urinals, which overflowed and spilled on me. Within an hour, my trainer and I did not look so good. Our hair had gone to a shade of black, and our skin as white as paper. Other than this, we were normal. However, before too long, strange things began to happen. We started experiencing problems with the jet's entry hatch. Leaving it closed the night before, we'd sometimes find it open the next morning. Items also began to move by themselves, despite needing a human hand to do it. None of us had done this. We assumed that someone must be sneaking over the fence at night, but why would someone put themselves at risk to cause such silly mischief? As far as acts of espionage go, opening and closing a hatch or moving an object here or there is more peculiar than effective. Unable to explain it any other way, we even requested the security police to check on the plane in the middle of the night. Eventually, we began to suspect that a fellow crew member was playing a joke. As we completed the easier tasks, we finally got into the hangar to fix some more serious problems and conduct deeper inspections. We decided we'd replace the floor ourselves. The old plane used plywood painted special. Each screw was put in by hand by 3 of us. It was very tedious work with many, many screws. This was when the first bolt disappeared without explanation. The bolt was related to the pilot's seat. Our lead trainer was at this chore. He was clearly disturbed and very upset when the bolt went missing, claiming it had disappeared when his back was turned. A peculiar noise was associated with the event. He described hearing what sounded like a piece of metal hitting a hard surface with something loose attached. Such a noise was not possible at the location of his work. There was nothing that could make that sound. The bolt was never found. Strange things always happened around that plane. I had a wrench that kept going missing and would show up in mysterious places. The chrome had worn off, meaning the colour of this particular tool looked like none of the other wrenches in the same set. There was no way I could confuse it for another. Whenever it would go missing and turn up somewhere else, I would laugh and think I was playing a joke on myself somehow. 12 years later, I continued to shrug off the strange wrench and all I had experienced whilst working on that plane, until working under my vehicle one day. I was adding a bolt and turned around to grab the wrench that was playing tricks when I heard a peculiar noise. My back was to the bolt that was waiting to be tightened as I heard the sound of metal hitting a hard surface on the ground and something loose attached to it. I turned around to tighten the bolt, but it was gone. It disappeared while my back was turned. Not only that, the bolt had already been in its location, loosely fastened with the nut already threaded by hand. It had disappeared entirely, seemingly stolen by someone who would have had to have unbolted it first. I was also working on a dirt driveway. There was no hard surface to create the noise I heard. I again tried to shrug it off, but this time I was unable to stop myself remembering the old KC-135 and my trainer's missing bolt. A friend I told the story to suggested that the chrome of the bolt may have somehow reacted with my hands. My hands have, after all, been on some hazardous duties in their time. When I got home, I cleaned up and filled my coffee cup from the cabinet and put it in the microwave. When I pulled the cup out, there was a noise at the bottom. I wiggled the cup and realized there was something in it. To my shock and awe, as I dumped out my coffee, there was a chrome bolt in the bottom. I was instantly moved to shock and nearly tears. This paranormal event, along with the others I experienced, has never been deciphered. I was relieved to learn my plane went to junk 12 years ago in 2008. I was an infantryman for the US Army, assigned to 1st Squadron, 3rd Cavalry Regiment. We deployed to Gardez City in Paktia Province, Afghanistan in 2014. There were some historical areas destroyed by the enemy that dated back to Alexander the Great, including a castle. On August 22nd, around 2 a.m, myself and a close friend were on tower guard duty. We were trying to stay awake when we both started seeing movement in the construction site outside of the Hesco barrier. It was rapid, too fast for natural movement, even for animals. As I went for the radio to call up the sergeant of the guard, the radio traffic lit up from the other towers, calling in the same thing. Fast-moving shadows and strange noises. My friend manned the machine gun, and I posted up on the sandbags ready for a fight. When the sergeant of the guard began giving instructions, he simply said, "Stand down," and told us there was nothing on the cameras. We were ordered to stand by for confirmation from Bandit 6, our company commander, who never worked on late-night shifts. A couple of minutes passed before the radio chimed up again. It was Bandit 6. "Do not stand down," we were ordered. "Keep post and ready. Only engage if you are being engaged." We kept post until daybreak 4 hours later. With a sore back and tired eyes, my friend and I heard a bang on the door behind us. It was the sergeant of the guard to relieve us. What was strange was he was not in full kit, but just his weapon. He stated that his appearance was, in a sense, the stand down. My friend was the first to leave the tower, then myself, as the new guards were manning the tower. We met at the debrief station and all tower guards submitted a written report of what had taken place earlier that night. We all agreed that something was wrong. The count totaled over 60 movements, a far larger force than what the enemy in the area could have mustered in a short time for a rapid test of the forward operations base's defense or for an assault. Unable to explain it otherwise, we tried to brush it off, claiming that it must have just been the wind rushing to the west, the east, kicking up dust and debris. A few hours later, after a few hours of sleep, we were awoken by our squad leader and told to gather in our makeshift smoke pit. It was then that the news was broken to us. Roughly around the time I had started seeing movements, whilst on tower guard duty, a friend of mine had taken his own life. He was found in one of the bunkers that we used to hide from mortar and other indirect fire. I tried to keep my bearings for the job we had at hand, but after a few days of mourning, I needed to speak with someone. I sought out our chaplain. After he gave me some advice, he asked me something peculiar. Had I seen anything strange that night? I told him of the events that had transpired, and he grew quiet. He stated that what we had seen were the souls of those who had suffered over the centuries. He told me the story of the history of the valley we were in, and of the number of painful deaths that had taken place there, leaving those souls to claim others who suffered a similar fate. I was shocked. What he told me continues to stick with me. Since then I have been told to call what I saw that night shadow people, those who suffer and wander to feed off those who suffer as well. I really am not sure how to say how I feel about this. It changed all of our lives, that I know. I've been deployed twice in my 8 years in the Corps. They were very different, once to Afghanistan and once to Iraq. The experience I'm about to describe happened 12 years ago, but I still dream about it and think about how it just couldn't have been real. I had been in theatre for about 3 months. I hadn't even been a Marine for much more than a year. Everything began as normal as any other deployment could be for that time. This was in 2008, when things were a lot more active. After about 2 months, I was selected for a special duty, so I was excited. I was telling pretty much anyone who could listen that I was being sent to garrison an important observation post. Turns out someone I told was there a few months before, and broke it to me that it was just a few huts in a fence on a hill in the middle of the mountains, with only very, very small, very, very rural villages nearby, some so rural they had no electricity. I was pretty bummed, but I didn't have long to complain as they wanted 28 of us to leave in 2 days to the post. There was a whole lot of stupid paperwork and meetings, more paperwork, safety briefs, and yet more meetings and more paperwork. I was relieved when we finally left in the early morning. The drive there was pretty uneventful. We had a few IED scares that were pretty much nothing. It was just a long and boring drive. The post we arrived at was small, 5 buildings and a high fence in the middle of a very large hill on top of a flat spot on a mountain. On the far side of the hill there were some old ruins, mud brick squares and deep holes. This was easily the highest point in a 100-kilometer area. We were replacing 17 guys who were cycling out. There were only 32 people when we arrived, 12 of which were only there for a few days to rest. As soon as we unloaded, we were pulled aside by the warrant officer in charge of the observation post. A warrant officer being CO, commanding officer of a post, is different. Not unheard of, but uncommon. He pulled us into his office and closed the door. He said that this was a staging area for various special operation groups. He told us that they come in to rest and resupply for operations in the area. He also ordered us not to talk to them, do not listen in on them, and do not harass them. They need rest and time, as they do a lot. After a few days, we settled into a routine of looking, watching, cleaning, and going on small patrols to check the nearby villages. We received supplies every 5 days or so. That was pretty much the only interaction we had with the outside world. Guys were coming in and out several times a week, sometimes in vehicles, sometimes in helicopters, and even once on horses. Sometimes they were in uniform, other times they were dressed like locals. Sometimes they came in the middle of the night, sometimes in the middle of the day. There was no pattern other than they never stayed longer than 2 days, and it was very rare they would interact with any of us. We began hearing rumours from the men who had been stationed there for a while about how CIA operators came in once in a blue moon. We also heard stories of how a lot of the special ops guys were here for psychological warfare, things like messing up corpses, killing livestock, burning down villages that harboured suspected insurgents and things like that. But these were just rumours. No one ever saw the results of their suspected work. About 2.5 weeks in, 24 guys showed up in large armoured SUVs. They didn't seem like the usual guys. They never ate at the same time as us and avoided us all the time. When they would talk to each other, they would do so in really soft whispers, as far away as they could get from us. Sometimes they got into the SUVs and drove out of the wire about 100 meters and just sat there in a line in the middle of the road for a while and then came back. The really odd part was that they stayed 6 days. No one had ever had anyone stay that long that wasn't permanent personnel. Rumours once again started making the rounds of how they had to be contractors for the CIA. One morning when I was taking my post, I noticed they were gone. Not a trace, nothing was left, and they said nothing to anyone. Later in the day, 17 of us and 1 interpreter were pulled into the briefing room and told about an informant who had been giving us information about a small village about 11 kilometers away. Patrols in the area said the villagers were complaining about us killing their goats to steal their skins. Villagers always do things like that, trying to get money or stuff from us. Yet this was a little different. There were reports of the women and children leaving the area that morning and going to other villages and towns in the area. Since no one was around, they wanted us to go out and check out what was going on. We left the next morning at 04:15 hours. The road up the mountain to the village was a single-lane dirt track, hardly wide enough for our Humvees. About half a click out, we got out and split up, with 6 of us on overwatch. The rest of us, 12 of us, were to walk into the village and see what was going on. The village was on top of a small mountain for the area, kind of in a big bowl into the top of the mountain. It reminded me of a volcano. As we approached, our radios started acting up. Most of us heard static, but very, very faint. You could hear voices, a lot of voices, all talking at the same time. You could just about hear them, but couldn't make out what they were saying. Only 4 of us heard it. The other 14 had nothing on their radios. This freaked us out. We were all on the same channel, and all our radios were encrypted. No one but Marines in the area had the encryption, so no one should have been able to broadcast or listen. It lasted about a minute before Overwatch came over the comms in a panic. They said 3 of them heard voices and the sound of clinking metal. Then all of a sudden they heard guttural, deep screams of many people. Then, mid-scream, it just cut off, then nothing. We figured it might be special ops guys in the AO, the area of operations, messing with us. Pranks were, after all, super common. Stuff like cheap fireworks thrown into the head while someone was using it, or spiders captured and put into people's footlockers, but nothing ever on patrol. Patrol was something serious, something we all take very seriously. This was a dangerous time to be in the country, and we didn't want to mess around and get someone killed. As we got closer, it happened again. This time 8 of us heard it. There were so many voices, but very little static this time. It was on my headset too. It was hard to make out any of what they were saying, but I swear I heard someone speaking in Russian. Our Overwatch again heard it too, but none of them could identify what was being said. One claimed they heard Arabic, one said Persian and one said Greek, one heard Latin, and the others said it was almost a mix of English and something they couldn't identify. We were all freaked out and called back to base. They said the radios picked up on their end but heard nothing. They told us to continue to objective. When we finally arrived at the small village, we found 11 small buildings with around 40 people living there. Walking down the middle of the village, we noticed there was a thin trail of blood from the gate. It stopped in a small puddle, almost dead center of the village. Soon after we walked into the front gate, 3 military-aged males popped out from behind a building and began opening fire. We all rushed to cover. I ran into a small house that had a 2 to 3 foot tall wall around it. As soon as I turned the corner, a man stepped out of the house, no more than 3 meters from me, with an AK pointed in my direction. He yelled something and fired at me. I dropped to the floor and fired a bunch of rounds at him in panic. 2 hit him in the chest, making a wet, slapping thud. He dropped like a rock. Someone else was firing in my direction, so I ran to hide beside the house. I heard his wet, wheezing, gargled final breaths. After all was said and done, we put down 8 men and critically wounded 2 more. That was my first kill. I was shaking like a leaf. I felt sick to my stomach and everything felt foggy in my head. I puked 3, maybe 4 times for the next hour. After we cleaned up and reported what happened, a cleanup crew came 4 hours later. Another squad from another posting went to one of the other villages and brought back some of the women. They said they had to carry them as they refused to go back. They were terrified. Our interpreter began helping us question them. All 4 women told the same story. The morning the day before, as everyone was beginning their day just as the sun was rising, a person covered in blood walked up to the village. After being alerted by some of the women yelling, the men grabbed their arms, many of whom had very old, unique muskets. As the bloody man came closer, they saw he wasn't entirely bloody. At this point in the women's stories, our interpreter had to consult with a translator from another unit. He looked puzzled. He asked the women again about what they had seen. All the women were being questioned separately in different houses, so there was no hearing what the others were saying. Even so, they all said the same thing. The man had no skin. According to their descriptions, his flesh was bloody, raw muscle. He had no eyes and no muscle on his lower jaw. It just hung there, wide open, with no tongue. His belly was slit and his guts were almost falling out. He was breathing in a raspy, groaning, moaning sort of way. He walked with slow, jerky, unnatural movements, his head swinging all around, slow, uneven steps that looked like his knees would buckle under his weight with each step. The men began firing at him. They said he didn't even slow down. He didn't even flinch as chunks of him went flying. When he reached the center of the village, he let out a wet, deafening, unnatural scream. Some of the men began bending from their ears and eyes, then collapsed. The flayed man just vanished, just disappeared in a red mist. The men who fell were gone too. No footprints, in or out. No trace but for the thin trail of blood. We were all shaken by that story. Everyone said it was just the women trying to scare us out the area because we had killed some of their men. It wasn't possible. As we were walking back to our vehicles, I was in front with the Overwatch crew, talking to them about what had happened with the radios and the stories, when we ran across a horse in the middle of the road. It was a white and tan horse, its legs cut off, flush to the belly, and its head twisted upside down. It was perpendicular to the road, so we could only see it on one side. It was sitting up, balanced on its belly, with its head contorted and sticking up. There was no blood anywhere around it. We stopped, spread out, and called the rest of the men, fearing it was an IED. The other squad had some bomb-experienced techs with them. We followed SOP, standard operating procedure, and checked it all out. The sun was already beginning to set. As we slowly approached it, we noticed some Arabic letters carved into its flank. There was also a 1.5 meter long shard of a broken mirror shoved into its side. When we finally reached it, we slowly surrounded it while keeping an eye to the hills. We saw the side facing away from the village was perfectly flayed. Not a single shred of skin left in that half, not a cut into the meat. We were all pretty freaked out now. We called it in and they had us take pictures and document everything. We finally asked our interpreter what the writings said. He shook his head and said he wasn't sure, as it was written in a very off way, kinda like really old Arabic, only it wasn't even Arabic words but Persian. He said he thought it meant, look, look, don't look. When we finally got back, we went and debriefed. The CO was quiet and listened intently as we told what had happened. When we were done, he sat there in a long silence. After what felt like half an hour, he said, "Forget it. You're all tired and shocked. First contact can play tricks on a mind." He told us that no native would kill a horse in this area, as they were far too valuable. Finally, he told us not to spread what we had seen around, warning us that we didn't want people questioning our mental fitness for duty. Then he stood up and calmly dismissed us before walking out. We filed no paperwork, no documentation, no anything. We were all freaked out. Not one of us slept for the next 3 days. We didn't bathe or shave in that time. Our CO didn't push us, letting us recover, we assumed. We were finally told to shower and shave on the 3rd day. We could only shower in groups of 4. I was in the second group of 4, standing outside the showers, when we all heard a shouting from the baths. We rushed in, and they were all as white as ghosts. They refused to look at the mirrors. After calming them down, we finally got it out of them that all of them had saw a flayed man in the mirror, where their faces should have been. Thinking that they were just still a bit shaken up, we moved them on and took our showers. I was the first one done and went to shave when, out the corner of my eye, I saw something red. I didn't want to seem crazy like the last 4, so I did not say anything, but every time I looked in the mirror, he was there. In the corner of the room, sometimes facing me, sometimes with his back turned. Everyone said the same thing. They either saw his face over theirs or in the corner of the room. We tried to rationalize it by saying that maybe this was all the special ops guys playing mind games with people in the area, you know, the rumored psychological warfare stuff. Maybe the CIA was trying to keep us out of the area, unofficially or something. When resupply day came, the CO said our replacements were inbound. We were ordered to pack up and leave with the trucks. It was only the 17 of us who left. The interpreter went home soon after we got back that day. We only spoke to each other in whispers when we got back to the base, finally agreeing not to talk about it, as it couldn't have really happened. After another 2 months, I ran into one of our replacements and asked how it went at the post, asking if anything weird or cool had happened there. He told me that it was mostly quiet, but that one village, several days after he arrived, was abandoned, so they sent some people to check it out. They found all the livestock had been killed, some missing parts and some with skin missing from areas. 3 women were found dead in one of the locked buildings, half rotted, with no eyes, tongues or lips. They figured they killed themselves and nature and wildlife had taken the soft parts. Of that deployment, 3 were killed in an IED, 2 were severely injured. The interpreter was found and killed with his entire family several weeks later. 4 took their own lives after returning home within the next 3 years. I can't help but think it was God punishing us. That day, in that messed up place, we ended the lives of 8 and injured 2. Now of the 18 of us, 8 were gone and 2 were severely disabled. We all grew separate after we got home and got out of the Marines. To this day, I still dread looking in mirrors. I visit a barber once a week to shave me. I have no mirrors in my home. When I'm somewhere around a mirror, I try to avoid it all I can, but when I do glance, I still see him in the corner of my vision. I don't know if this is all psychological, the effects of the story and the first time I had to defend myself, or if it is something really supernatural. In my dreams, I still see that blood trail. In any room, I see the women crying and bloody. I see the man on the ground, wheezing his final breaths. But most of all, I see the flayed man, there in the far corners of my vision. Thank you for listening, and thank you to those who have courageously shared their stories with us. And thank you also to our members both here on YouTube and on Patreon. Your support is much appreciated. If you have a paranormal experience you would like to share, you can do so by using the contact form on our website, the link to which is on screen now and in the description. For more of the paranormal, don't forget to subscribe and turn on all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Until next time.